Hey guys, tonight we're slipping behind the painted silk screens and carved jade doors of the Imperial Palace, where the walls aren't just thin, they're practically alive with whispers. You step barefoot along cold stone corridors, the hem of your robe brushing dustless tiles. Somewhere ahead, soft laughter filters from the women's quarters, and behind you, a pair of eunuchs pass like ghosts, their footsteps perfectly in sync. There is no privacy here, no real silence either, just layers upon layers of observation. In this world, it's not swords or scrolls that hold power, it's the flow of gossip. Who said what to whom? Who's falling out of favor? Who's sneaking into whose quarters? And the Imperial Eunuchs? They know everything. Not because they're nosy, because they have to. You, dear listener, are about to become one of them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this sleepy little history caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're small, scrawny, and quiet. Perfect qualities, they say. The eunuch who selects you barely glances at your face. He doesn't need to. What matters is that you won't be missed, and you won't be a threat. The palace is a machine. A beautiful one. Yes, but more like a jeweled spiderweb than a throne room. And the eunuchs? You'll learn, very quickly, that they're the nervous system. Every message, every gift, every favor, every scandal moves through them. You're barely 10 years old, yet your training begins the moment the gate closes behind you. There's no warm welcome, no banners, just a stiff robe and a silent nod from an older eunuch with eyes like flint. His name? Irrelevant. You'll call him master of the laundry, but laundry is the least of what he handles. He teaches you how to fold a robe without creasing it, but also how to notice the difference between perfume and poison. He shows you how to clean a mirror, but also how to spot whether someone's used it to spy. Every task is a test, and the reward for passing, not being punished. You are never truly alone, not even in your sleeping quarters, where 20 other boys huddle in identical beds, whispering rumors in the dark. Some cry quietly, some already know not to. You don't speak unless spoken to. That, at least, keeps you safe, for now. The palace seems endless. One courtyard leads to another. One hall opens into 3 more. You soon understand that this isn't just a building, it's a world, and eunuchs are the only ones allowed to pass freely between its layers. The outer court, where the scholars and ministers argue policy. The middle court, where the emperor holds audience and performs his duties. The inner court, sealed behind high red walls, where the harem lives in opulence and paranoia. You are headed there. Even as a novice, you catch on. A glance between concubines, a silken pouch dropped on purpose, a half-heard phrase during bath service. These fragments stick in your brain like threads on a spindle. You don't yet know what they mean, but you're learning to collect them. You notice something else too. Everybody underestimates you. They talk in front of you like you're furniture. Some even undress while speaking of treason. That's the most dangerous kind of invisibility. And the most useful. One day, you're told to deliver a comb to the noble consort. It's not just a comb, though. It's a message, hidden in the pattern of its teeth. You realize the handle unscrews, revealing a tiny slip of paper. It says, Peach blossoms bloom early this year. Be ready. You don't understand the code. You don't need to. Your job is to remember, not interpret. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were simply tools of the empress and her rivals, or if they secretly manipulated events for their own benefit. The truth, of course, lies somewhere in the dim corridors between. But you do know one thing already. Whoever holds the gossip holds the leash. And more than once, you see a favorite concubine rise, only to be abruptly exiled when a whisper about her reaches the emperor's ears. Eunuchs don't just hear things. They decide who hears them next. And you're just getting started. You're still small, still quiet. But today is the day you leave your old self behind for good. The ceremony is not a ceremony at all. No music, no incense, no words of comfort. Just a room that smells of vinegar and fear, a rope to bite down on, and the knowledge that nothing will ever quite grow back the same. They call it the snip of fate, but there's no poetry in it. You lie on a hard wooden bench, a rough cloth tucked under your back, while a man with no name prepares the tools. Some eunuchs were volunteers. Desperate parents offered them up in hopes of court favor. Others were slaves. A few were criminals given a choice: lose your life or lose your manhood. You didn't volunteer. No one really does. You don't scream. Or if you do, it doesn't matter. There are no mothers here to shush you. No fathers to storm in. Just an older boy holding your arms down and muttering, "Don't move. Or it's worse." You remember his face more than the pain. Pale, pockmarked, eyes too old for his body. The procedure is rough. The recovery is worse. You drink a bitter herbal tea daily for weeks, meant to purge the infection and kill what little rebellion remains in your blood. Sometimes, the tea kills the boys too. You're lucky. You only vomit for days. Historians still argue over how complete the castration was. Some say it varied from dynasty to dynasty, or even eunuch to eunuch. Some had the testicles removed, others, everything. It depended on the era, the budget, and the mood of the man holding the knife. What's certain is this: once it's done, you belong to the palace, entirely. You're assigned a new robe, gray, shapeless, unmistakably eunuch. You don't wear color anymore. You don't wear identity either. Your name is shortened, sometimes erased entirely. In this place, a name is dangerous. It gives people something to curse, to blame, or worse, to remember. But there's a strange sort of freedom, too. You no longer have to worry about the paths men outside the palace obsess over: marriage, inheritance, ambition. You don't marry, you don't have children, you don't build a legacy, you observe. And in the observing, you gather power of a quieter kind. You begin to notice things, like how the eunuchs who survive long aren't the biggest or loudest, but the ones who nod most convincingly and keep their mouths shut until the precise moment they shouldn't. You see how higher-ranking eunuchs never seem to walk quickly. Their power is in their calm. Their whispers make others rush. There's a hierarchy among eunuchs, just like outside. At the bottom, boys like you, sweeping courtyards and heating bathwater. Then come the runners, lithe, quick, good memory, perfect hearing. Then the attendants to noble ladies, the go-betweens for concubines and court officials, the ones who pass on secrets wrapped in silk. And finally, the ones who manage entire departments, palace construction, tax silos, even military logistics. Did you know that, during the Ming Dynasty, some eunuchs controlled entire provinces? Some historians say they were second only to the emperor. Others claim they ran him like a puppet on gold strings. You don't think about that yet. Your world is still soap buckets and nighttime nosebleeds. But already, gossip begins to slip toward you. Another boy saw a concubine slap an attendant. Someone overheard the emperor shouting about a lost jade seal. And you saw something strange in the laundry. Blood on a gown that wasn't supposed to be there. You say nothing. That's the game. You also start to learn the art of cleaning invisibly. You're given a feather duster and told to sweep the shelves of the Imperial study. You touch every scroll. Not to read. No, that's forbidden. But to feel. One has an indentation, like something small and heavy pressed into it. A seal? Maybe. A coin? Why? You file it away in your mind. You don't yet realize how dangerous these observations are. But you will. One night, during lantern cleaning duty, you spot two senior eunuchs in the corridor, speaking in hushed tones. They're using euphemisms. Pears for winter, and horses resting early. At the time, you think they're just odd. A week later, the Minister of Rights is executed for alleged disloyalty. And suddenly, pears and horses don't sound so innocent. The code of survival here is simple. Never speak first. Never laugh too hard. Never be noticed for the wrong reason. But if the moment is right, and you say just the right thing to just the right person, doors open. You wonder what the emperor looks like. You've never seen him. You might never see him. But you've heard him. His voice carries strangely, calm, like a pond surface before a storm. Some eunuchs serve him directly, shaving his beard, preparing his ink. They say he talks in riddles. Or sometimes, not at all. You learn that silence is not absence. It's a message, and you begin to listen for it. Some nights, you wake in the dark and imagine running away. But where would you go? Who would take you? You're not a boy anymore. Not a man either. You are palace property. The best you can hope for is to rise high enough to no longer scrub floors, and to live long enough to remember who you once were. You think of the boy with pockmarks. He doesn't speak much anymore, but he still walks straight. And when the masters call, they call him with respect. Maybe one day, they'll call you too. Your hands still tremble when you hold porcelain, but your ears have become steadier than your fingers. You're no longer just a boy sweeping floors or hauling buckets. You're being groomed now. No, not with brushes and perfume like the concubines, but with habits, discipline, and the slow burn of awareness. It starts when you're selected for listening duty. That's not what it's officially called. Of course, officially, you are learning how to attend with discretion in the company of high-ranking ladies. But everyone knows what it really means. You're being trained to hear without hearing, to remember without seeming to. You sit in a corner, polishing a hairpin, while two noble women play Wakey and bicker about poetry. It sounds harmless, but one misused line from the Book of Songs could be a coded insult about a rival's family. One reference to a plum blossom blooming out of season might imply scandal. And if you catch it and report it to the right person, suddenly you're not invisible anymore. So you train, not your body, your attention. You're taught to tell the difference between silk rustling from a curtsy and silk rustling because someone is hiding a letter in their sleeve. You learn that certain perfumes signal certain moods. If Lady Shu wears orchid oil in the morning, she's trying to catch the emperor's attention. If she wears it at night, she's probably already caught him. And don't even get started on fan language. A flick to the left, irritation. A snap shut, anger. Tapping the frame, impatience. Some eunuchs specialize in fans alone. You begin to see why. Your instructor is a thin man named Jia. He's missing 2 fingers, though no one says why. He once served the Grand Empress Dowager and claims to have outlived 3 separate coups. Not because I was clever, he says while sipping tea that smells suspiciously like licorice root, but because I knew when to cough loud enough to end a conversation. Jia trains you by sitting you in a room with people talking and assigning you a single task. Find what wasn't said. You fail, of course, many times, but slowly. Your instincts sharpen. You can smell tension before it's visible. You notice when someone's smile has too many teeth. Historians still debate whether the eunuch's famous gossip networks were formally organized or just a natural evolution of palace life. Some records describe scrolls encoded with reports, handed between eunuch departments like a bureaucratic game of whisper. Others insist it was more organic, just 100 sharp minds all picking up dropped hints and stringing them together like beads. Either way, you're learning how to string your own. There's one moment you'll never forget. You're dusting an incense burner in the Hall of Blossoms when a concubine enters, weeping loudly and clutching a letter. 2 other ladies trail behind her, faces carefully blank. You know you're supposed to keep your head down, but your eyes flick up, just once, and you see it. The one in the back smirks. You say nothing. But that night, while folding towels, you whisper to Jia. Madame Lee's tears were real, but Madame Sun smiled when she cried. He doesn't react, not at first. Then he nods, once. Good, he says. You're beginning to see the river under the ice. Your training continues. You're now allowed into the corridor behind the women's music chamber. The sounds are beautiful, plucked zithers, and sweet bamboo flutes. But the real performance happens between the notes. A musician arrives late and glances nervously at one of the dancers. A maid delivers tea and pauses a heartbeat too long before setting it down. The dancer later stumbles, and a rumor begins to ripple that the tea was drugged. You store the entire scene away in your head like a mental scroll. Some evenings, Jia has you replay entire events aloud. What did the 3rd consort say when she saw the emperor's favorite robe? Who poured the wine? What was the color of the cup? He's testing your memory, but also your ability to notice intention, motive, the scent behind the gesture. You become fluent in half-truths. Someone says, the moon is bright tonight, and you know it means the empress is in a foul mood. Someone else says, the peaches are overripe, and it means a concubine is likely pregnant. You are becoming dangerous. One morning, you're summoned to help set up a private garden tea for a high-ranking consort. You think it's routine, just cushions, fans, light snacks. But halfway through arranging the fruit tray, you hear 2 noble women on the other side of the screen discussing something strange. One mentions a strange mole the emperor has south of the navel. The other gasps and then laughs. You are not supposed to be in earshot. You pretend not to hear. You hum to yourself softly and adjust a vase. But later, you casually tell Jia, noble Lady Meng knows more than she should. He exhales long and slow, and for the first time, he looks worried. That sort of knowing, he mutters, can kill you. You're not sure who he means, her or you. You're also starting to realize that while eunuchs don't officially wield power, knowledge makes them kingmakers in a palace of queens. The emperor sees only what's shown to him. The concubines only see their own hall, but eunuchs like you drift through it all. You see everything, and if you're careful and clever and absolutely silent when you need to be, you'll survive, maybe even thrive. You've been in the palace for a few years now, and you no longer jump at every sharp voice or bowed head. You move differently. Your steps are light but deliberate. You hold your gaze steady, but not too steady. You've mastered the art of existing just enough to be useful, and never quite enough to be threatening. Which is why, one morning, you're selected for reassignment. They don't ask you if you want to go. Of course not. You are informed, gently but firmly, that you will now be serving in the inner quarters, the women's world, the harem. It sounds glamorous to outsiders. Rows of women in embroidered silk, petals floating in jade basins, music echoing under moonlight. And yes, some of that is true, but mostly, it's a furnace. Pressure builds there. Resentments simmer. Every sigh, every glance, every silence means something. You are told to say nothing unless spoken to. You're given a soft gray uniform, slippers that make no sound, and a basin to carry in case someone needs foot washing or to spit tea into. You are, effectively, furniture with a heartbeat, but furniture can listen. The inner quarters are strange. Time moves differently here. Outside, ministers worry about famines, taxes, and barbarians. Inside, the only battles are fought with beauty and attention. One woman loses her standing because she gained weight. Another, because a concubine's pet parrot repeated a joke she once told about the emperor's bald spot. You begin to understand. In this part of the palace, you don't need armies to destroy someone. Just a whisper, a pause, and a poorly timed compliment. And you, dear listener, are about to be in the center of it all. The ladies don't speak to you at first. They call for things by clapping, by pointing, by simply raising a finger. But soon, they begin to forget you're even there. That's when it begins. You see two concubines exchanging gifts beneath the silk curtains, a bottle of perfume, oddly specific, musk and cinnamon. Later that night, you hear the emperor sneeze during their visit. He's allergic. Coincidence? Maybe. But she doesn't get summoned again for weeks. You serve tea to the grand consort and hear her mutter, barely audible. She wears red again, so early in morning. You remember that the emperor's second cousin just died. Apparently, someone's forgotten or ignored her wardrobe etiquette. Later, that someone is mysteriously moved to a colder part of the palace. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were neutral servants or deeply embedded power brokers. Were they puppets of the Empress Dowager, agents of foreign wives, or did they have their own hidden loyalties? There are scrolls burned, rumors suppressed, entire chronicles that just stop. But you know what's true in your bones. A eunuch knows before anyone else. He sees the argument. He hears the soft sobbing. He notices which plate comes back half-eaten. One morning, you're asked to help dress one of the emperor's newer concubines. You kneel quietly, handing her hairpins, arranging her belt. She asks you softly, "Do you think the emperor will like this?" Her eyes are wide, vulnerable. She's no older than you. You're not supposed to answer, but you nod once. Just enough. She smiles and thanks you. The next day, she's the talk of the harem, favored. A week later, she's limping. No one says why. You begin to understand the second set of rules, the invisible ones. Never let one woman think you're allied with another. Never compliment. Never comment. Never carry messages unless someone senior explicitly tells you to. You are neutrality wrapped in flesh. Still, your mind races. You start keeping mental notes. Who meets whom? Who stops laughing when someone enters the room? Who never eats the plum slices? The Empress always wears pearls when she's planning something. A low-ranked concubine suddenly has access to sandalwood incense, a gift usually reserved for higher tiers. And then there are the glances. Two concubines pass in the corridor, their maids trailing like shadows. One slightly bows. The other keeps walking. That's not a snub. That's a message. You watch it all unfold. You say nothing. But one evening, while preparing the incense in the bathing chamber, you see the fourth consort slip a letter into the sleeve of her favorite maid. It's sealed with beeswax and stamped with the emblem of her father's clan. It should not be here. Later that night, you visit the laundry to accidentally mention that the fourth consort may have lost something important near the baths. You don't name names. You don't have to. Within a week, she's placed under quiet observation. A little too quiet? You ask nothing. You keep working, but your slippers now get softer silk. Your food is slightly warmer than the others. Someone's noticed you. Someone important. That's both the best and worst thing that can happen. Still, you go about your duties. You fluff pillows. You carry gossip like perfume. Lightly, invisibly. But it sticks. You watch one lady get pregnant, only to miscarry quietly after a visit from another whose maid carried bitter herbs in her pouch. You see a songstress banned because her lyrics accidentally referenced a scandal from the previous dynasty. One misstep and they're gone. You wonder when, if anyone will notice you've been collecting their missteps all along, but no one looks at the wallpaper. No one questions the breeze. And that's what you are now. The wind behind the screen. The eye behind the fan. Watching. Always. You're beginning to understand that the most powerful people in the palace are not the ones with titles, but the ones with information. And nowhere is information more dangerous or delicious than inside the harem's sleeping quarters. You've been assigned to the evening bath rotation. This is where gossip flows as freely as the rose water. As you stand near the steam-filled chamber, holding clean robes and fragrant towels, you listen. You always listen. Tonight, 3 concubines are sharing the tub. The water ripples with flower petals, and laughter dances in the air like perfume. But beneath that surface is tension sharp enough to draw blood. So, one woman says, gently massaging her own shoulders. The Emperor spent all of last night in the West Pavilion. Did he? Another replies, tracing circles on the water's surface. I suppose Lady Anne's singing has gotten better. Or her thighs softer. The third giggles. It's not just cattiness. It's strategy. Each word is a feeler, a weapon, a test. You know better than to smirk. You simply adjust the towels, bow, and step out, far enough to avoid suspicion, close enough to remember every syllable. Births, miscarriages, who was summoned last week, who coughed blood into her sleeve. None of these things are merely personal. They're political. And the eunuchs? You are the courier pigeons of scandal. But you're not the only one. There are older eunuchs who've been doing this for decades. You start noticing how they position themselves slightly to the left of a doorway, where light filters in just enough to catch the angle of a whisper, or how they cough softly when a conversation turns dangerous, as if warning the speaker, you are being heard. 1. Master Lin takes a liking to you, or maybe he just sees something useful. Always remember, he tells you one night while sharpening a comb that seems too decorative to actually use. It's not what people say in anger that matters. It's what they mutter when they think they're safe. You nod. You're learning. One evening, while folding robes, you overhear two maids whispering about Lady Chen's baby. She says it's the Emperor's. One mutters, but the child looks like the gardener. That boy who brings peaches? The other gasps. He's too handsome. You say nothing, but that week, when the Emperor visits Lady Chen, you make sure the gardener happens to be trimming roses near the pavilion. Pure coincidence. Of course. A few days later, the child is sent away for health reasons. Lady Chen disappears from the summons list. Historians still argue whether eunuchs weaponized gossip on their own initiative, or if they simply reflected the ambitions of those they served. But you know better. Gossip is a currency, and in this palace, it buys loyalty, rank, and sometimes silence. There are dark rumors, too, that certain eunuchs slipped herbs into cups to prevent pregnancies, that others passed coded messages to outside clans, even rebels, that some could sway imperial favor with a single suggestion murmured behind a lacquered screen. You once saw a concubine receive a strange package, a hand mirror wrapped in silk, with a jade handle shaped like a phoenix. She opened it slowly, stared into it, and paled. No one explained. No one had to. She packed her things by morning. Later, you learn it was a message. The phoenix meant rebirth. The mirror? Reflection. Together, it meant you've been seen. It's time to disappear. That mirror came from a eunuch, not the emperor, not the empress. A eunuch. You begin to grasp your position. You are not powerful. Not directly. But you are the riverbed through which power flows. And you decide what flows where. A fringe detail stays with you. Lady Ping always eats only one side of the peach. Not because she's delicate, but because she once choked as a child and never outgrew the fear. That moment of vulnerability sticks with you, not because it's sentimental, but because it means something. Even the most elevated people in this place are human, and that humanity is what makes them manipulable. You're now the one junior eunuchs come to with questions. Who's in favor? They whisper. Which hall is hosting the next poetry reading? You don't answer directly. You hint. You raise an eyebrow. You shuffle a tea tray toward a different pavilion. You don't speak truths. You let others arrive at them themselves. But some gossip is heavier than others. One day, you hear of a concubine who has written poems, too bold, too critical. She never intended them to be read by anyone outside her circle, but a eunuch found them, or perhaps placed them. Either way, they ended up in the hands of the empress. That concubine's rooms are sealed by nightfall. Her name is not spoken again. You realize that while gossip can be light and playful, it's just as often a trap. And the person who sets that trap is often not the speaker, but the listener, you. So you walk a careful line. You share just enough, to just the right people, in just the right tone, never more, Nevertheless, you begin to sense that a shift is coming. The emperor has grown older, more paranoid. The court is restless. The noble families murmur about succession. And you stand silently by a doorway, folded in linens, as the most powerful women in the empire discuss a cousin's wedding, a mysterious illness, and whether the stars favor the next full moon. All unrelated topics, except, of course, they're not. Because gossip, here, is never just talk. It's architecture, it's artillery, and you become a master mason of murmurs. You've long since stopped being the new boy. Your face is familiar in the corridors of the inner court. Maids nod to you. Junior eunuchs step aside. Even concubines who never speak your name glance at you with that subtle look of acknowledgement reserved for reliable furniture, familiar, convenient, always within arm's reach. But today, you're summoned for something different. The Emperor's errands, says the Master of Assignments, handing you a folded silk scroll. You're to begin shadowing a senior eunuch assigned directly to the Son of Heaven. Your heart stutters. You're not going to see the Emperor yet. He's a god cloaked in layers of gold and etiquette. But you will serve those who serve him. That's as close as it gets for most eunuchs. Your new duties are oddly mundane. Carrying scrolls from the calligraphy hall, delivering jade trinkets to the astrologer, escorting a favored concubine's parrot to the physician because it's been melancholy, but none of it is meaningless. You quickly realize that each errand is carefully selected, loaded with subtext. That jade trinket isn't a gift, it's a warning. The scroll isn't a poem, it's a test of political loyalty. And the melancholy parrot, it repeats everything it hears in the consort's quarters. Who knows what dangerous phrases it might have memorized? You begin to see the errand not as a task, but as a transmission. Sometimes you're told to walk slowly. Sometimes to wait at a particular pavilion until a certain person exits. You aren't to speak. You're just there. But your presence sends a message. The Emperor knows. Or, at least, someone who knows the Emperor is watching. One evening, you're sent to deliver a fresh inkstone to the study. Simple enough, until you notice the seal on the box isn't the Emperor's, but the Empress Dowager's. A quiet claim of territory, a reminder of her presence. You leave it on the desk and say nothing. The Emperor won't acknowledge it, but he'll see it. Historians still argue whether eunuchs played these roles deliberately or simply served as vessels for larger ambitions. But you see the mechanics every day. Errands don't just maintain the palace, they manipulate it. One afternoon, you accompany a eunuch delivering a mooncake to a consort's quarters. One mooncake. No plate. No fruit. Just a single pastry with a silver lotus pressed into its top. You find out later, it wasn't for her. It was to be seen by a visiting maid, who would mention it to another concubine, who would spiral into jealousy, and within a week, lose favor. One pastry, one errand, one domino. You're starting to suspect most of the palace's disasters begin with something that looks harmless. You also start assisting with dream interpretations. Yes, you heard that right. When the Emperor dreams of tigers, the astrologer is summoned. When he dreams of broken bridges, the herbalist is brought in. But before either of them arrive, a eunuch is dispatched to relay the dream's summary to the appropriate scholar. That eunuch is now you, and you realize your version of the dream becomes the version of the dream. Was the tiger growling or sleeping? Was the bridge broken by flood or by time? Each detail affects how the court reacts. Is the Emperor worried about rebellion, or aging, or legacy? You don't lie, of course, but your memory can be conveniently selective. One night, the emperor dreams of crows circling a pine tree. The dream is relayed to you as he wakes. You choose not to mention the pine, only the crows. The astrologer takes this to mean unrest in the outer provinces. Troops are moved. A noble family is accused of harboring disloyal intentions, all because you left out one tree. You begin to grasp the danger of proximity. You don't need a title to pull levers. You only need presence and memory and discretion. The more trusted you become, the more errands you're given. One day, you're tasked with retrieving a hair ornament from the emperor's private library. Yes, library, where concubines sometimes visit to discuss poetry. The ornament has a missing gemstone. You're to deliver it to the jeweler with no questions asked. You ask no questions, but you notice the gem is not missing. It's been replaced. The new one is slightly darker. You wonder, is it poisoned? Is it a signal? Is someone testing the emperor's attention? You say nothing. You begin to notice when people speak past each other. The emperor's physician says, "His Majesty sleeps deeply." The empress's chief attendant replies, "Then let's hope no sounds disturb him." It's not just conversation. It's maneuvering. You pass these moments along, indirectly. You mention them when folding robes or arranging scrolls. You accidentally leave the edge of a message peeking out of a drawer. You suggest that a certain tray be delivered early, not late, and just like that, messages move without you ever opening your mouth. There's an old saying among eunuchs, "We do not speak the wind, we carry it." But lately, you feel like the wind listens to you more than you listen to it. One senior eunuch quietly advises, "If you must speak, speak to the floor. It never repeats a word." You chuckle, but you notice he rarely touches his food unless he watches someone else take a bite first. Paranoia, you think, or wisdom. You're starting to see little rituals among the powerful, coded behaviors. The emperor taps his chopsticks twice when he's displeased, but trying not to show it. The empress smooths her gown when lying. A certain consort touches her hair 3 times before issuing a veiled insult. And once you learn their rituals, you know when something's off. That knowledge, invaluable. You end your day folding robes as a crimson sunset burns across the horizon. Somewhere, 2 court musicians argue over tuning. A concubine's maid whispers to another about a courier who slipped at the gate, and you pretend to hum while mentally cataloging all of it. You don't command armies, you don't write edicts, you don't own land, but you carry the emperor's dreams, the empress's fears, and the court's whispers in the crook of your arm, in the soft shuffle of your slippers, and if you ever choose to share them, the entire palace would shake. There's a particular kind of silence that lives inside the palace at night, not absence of sound, exactly, but the stillness that happens when everyone is pretending not to hear anything. You're moving through that silence now, carrying a tray of cooling tea down a corridor lined with lotus-shaped lanterns. The moonlight slices in like polished silver. Tonight, you're not just delivering drinks. You're listening for codes, because the fan is back, not the kind for cooling yourself. No. The silk-folded fan that noble Lady Wren always uses when she's trying to say what she cannot say. You've watched her for months. On warm days, she fans herself slowly, deliberately, from right to left when she's relaxed. But when she wants someone to notice her distress, she moves the fan up and down, unusual, and very intentional. Tonight, you spot that same movement as you enter with the tea. The music is playing, distant zithers, soft and minor. A concubine is reciting poetry to no one in particular, but the way she enunciates certain phrases, bitter roots beneath the plum tree, crimson leaves blown by northern winds, those are phrases from a banned text, not completely outlawed, just discouraged. Enough to raise a brow. You keep your brow neutral. As you pour her tea, she taps her cup once, then again, a signal. Another eunuch enters a moment later, offering sweetened rice cakes. The tray shakes slightly in his hands. You both know something's happening. Fans, flutes, and poisoned tea, it all sounds dramatic. But in the palace, it's standard procedure. Every instrument, every object, every motion has meaning. Nothing is just what it seems. Back in your dormitory that evening, you whisper to the boy on the next bed, "Did she tap her fan twice?" He nods, and blinked left. Someone's about to fall. Historians still argue how organized the codes of the inner court were, whether the fan language was a formal system like semaphore, or simply habits that evolved into symbols. But even the most skeptical scholars admit that these women, intelligent, strategic, and often powerless in traditional ways, found ways to speak. And eunuchs like you were fluent in all of it. Take the flute, for instance. A visiting musician once played a haunting tune with a warble at the end of every second measure. You recognized it immediately, a melody associated with mourning. The empress's favorite concubine was seen crying the next morning. That same week, her family's estate was raided. Coincidence? Probably not. And then there's the tea. You learn to sniff it first. Every cup. Not because you think someone's trying to poison you, you're not important enough yet, but because someone is always trying to poison someone. Bitter, almond scent, bad sign. Too much lotus root, sleep aid, or something more permanent. You see a concubine accept tea with both hands one day, but glance nervously at the eunuch who served it. Later, she pretends to spill it. You clean up the mess, noting how the spilled liquid turns yellow against the lacquered floor. That evening, she faints, blames the heat. She doesn't die, but her rival's maid vanishes shortly after. You don't ask questions. You press harder on your broom and sweep slowly, ears wide open. Sometimes, you're the one meant to be the signal. A senior eunuch might send you to linger outside a door with a red handkerchief visible in your sash. That means wait 2 minutes before entering. If your sash is green, it means the empress is watching. A blue sash? That means speak the prepared words, even if they're not true. You think back to your training. A eunuch is not a man, not a voice, not a name. Gia had said once, "We are instruments, but we choose what song is played, and sometimes you sing it yourself." One day, the fourth consort asks you a question as you pour her morning tea. "Tell me," she says lightly, "what flower is blooming in the East Garden today?" It's an absurd question. It's winter. Nothing is bloomin' day. But she knows that you know the answer isn't about botany. "Camellias," you say softly. "Red ones." Her eyes widen just slightly. Camellias mean secrecy. Red means danger. She stands, adjusts her sleeves, and thanks you. Later that night, her rival's brother is caught forging documents. No one asks how the empress found out. You are growing skilled at subtle choreography. You arrange plates on trays in certain orders to convey moods. You leave a door slightly ajar to suggest eavesdropping. You cough softly in the middle of a sentence, and the speaker rephrases. You touch your left ear when approaching someone's quarters, which means do not speak. Walls have ears. They always do. And then there are the hairpins. Some are meant to sparkle, others are messages. You begin to track which consort wears which kind. You notice that a phoenix motif worn before the Mid-Autumn Festival suggests a bid for advancement, that a peony carved in amber might mean mourning, or alliance with a dowager known for peony gardens. Once, you're asked to retrieve a fallen pin shaped like a chrysanthemum. The concubine whispers, "Do not give it to her. You know who she means." You pocket the pin and forget to return it. 3 days later, the accused concubine is demoted for disrespect, all because you followed the script. But scripts can be rewritten. One evening, you receive tea with a lotus petal floating in it. A small, beautiful detail, except it's the third time this month. That's not an accident. It's a question. Are you still loyal? You don't answer. Not in words. Instead, you adjust the lanterns in the corridor outside her rooms, one wick shorter than the other. She'll notice. She'll understand. You are not just a messenger anymore. You're a player. And in a palace where lives change over a cup of tea, that makes you one of the most powerful people alive. You've learned to sleep with one eye open, not because someone is actively trying to kill you, though that's always a possibility, but because trust is a luxury, and in the palace, luxuries get you killed. Even among eunuchs, there are factions, groups, rivalries. There's no bloodline to pass on, no spouse to confide in, no children to protect. So your survival depends entirely on information, how much you know, and how little others know that you know it. Tonight, the dormitory is too quiet. Normally, you hear soft breathing, the rustle of robes, maybe even low laughter from a whispered joke. But tonight, it's the kind of silence that feels arranged. You open your eyes. Across the room, someone is missing. His bedroll is untouched. His robe still folded neatly. He's never late. Never. You don't say a word. You don't have to. Everyone else is pretending to sleep too. You lie still, watching the shadow of the paper lanterns flicker on the ceiling, wondering who he crossed, or what he said. In the morning, no one mentions it, but when breakfast is served, his bowl is missing from the tray, vanished, as if he was never there. You take note. That same day, a senior eunuch discreetly asks if you've been speaking with the scribes in the Bureau of Ceremonies. You haven't. But the question isn't about what you've done. It's about what they think you've done. And just like that, you realize you're being watched. There's a saying among eunuchs, if 3 people know, it's already an execution. So, when you speak in riddles. If you share in glances. If you laugh after the most powerful person in the room does. You notice small changes. Your laundry is returned late. Your name is left off a list. A favorite consort forgets your presence during her daily tea. A silence louder than words. It's not paranoia if it's protocol. You begin to defend yourself the only way a eunuch can, quietly. You intercept a rumor before it reaches the wrong ears. You accidentally leave a note under the wrong pillow, ensuring 2 rivals turn against each other. You compliment the new ceremonial overseer just loudly enough to be overheard by his enemies, making yourself seem like an ally without ever lifting a finger. Historians still argue how much internal espionage went on among eunuchs. Some claim they were loyal bureaucrats caught in the crossfire. Others insist the entire court was a spider web of schemes, each thread pulled by a eunuch whose smile masked a dagger. You know it's somewhere in between. You remember the boy who vanished? His name was Yao. You discover, weeks later, that he had been keeping a journal, a personal one, hidden under his sleeping mat. Inside, he wrote things: who dined with whom, which eunuch passed which letter, who yawned during the emperor's evening recital. Not even gossip, just observations. And that was enough. A fellow eunuch found it, turned it in. The journal disappeared. So did Yao. You burn your own notes that night, just to be sure. From then on, everything you know, you memorize. No slips of paper, no clues, just your mind. A vault sealed with habit and fear. You also begin to learn the art of preemption. One day, a consort's maid glances at you too long in the corridor. You don't recognize her, but someone else might say she smiled. Someone might say you smiled back. So you speak first, quietly, to a senior eunuch. She looked frightened, you say, as if she'd been told to follow someone. Now she is under suspicion. Not you. It's cruel. You know that. But it's survival. Another time, you hear your name mentioned during a bathhouse conversation between two junior eunuchs. One of them is complaining. You wait until the next day, then approach him with a smile. You have something of mine. You say gently, "A tea order from Lady Ping." He blinks, confused. "No, I don't." But he will, because you'll make sure it appears in his satchel by the next morning. He'll be too busy explaining the confusion to ever mention your name again. You sleep better that night, not because you're safe, but because you've reminded the shadows you bite back. Sometimes, the danger isn't from your enemies, but from your friends. A young eunuch named Jin shares your meal for several months. You laugh together. He teaches you to fold towels with extra flair. You show him the secret of warming slippers for the Empress's feet. One evening, he leans in and whispers, "If I told you something big, would you keep it?" You don't answer. You look at him just long enough, and that's all it takes. The next day, he's reassigned, far from the harem, far from you. You never see him again. Did you say something? Or did he? Sometimes. It doesn't matter. You realize the only way to survive is to balance suspicion with usefulness. You must be helpful enough to be protected, but bland enough not to be envied. Memorable for your reliability, not for your presence. You walk a tightrope in silk slippers, and below it, 1,000 sharp smiles. So you smile back, a little less brightly, a little more carefully. You sleep now in the corner of the dormitory, where you can see both the door and the window. Your slippers are always pointed outward, your robe always folded just so, and every night, before your eyes close, you whisper the names of the people who've disappeared. Not aloud, never aloud, just in your mind. As a reminder, you wake earlier now, not because you're required to, but because it's the best time to observe without being observed. While others still breathe evenly in their sleep, you are already dressed, already moving, already watching. You've learned something crucial in these quiet hours. Gossip doesn't just fall into your lap. You have to position yourself where it lands. This morning, you're stationed in the hall of eternal harmony, where the emperor's favorite concubine has requested incense. Not because she's praying, but because she knows someone else is listening. You. She's seated near the window, her voice low, but not too low. She knows the acoustics in this room, knows exactly which direction her words will travel. She dreams of yellow chrysanthemums, she says to her maid, brushing her hair. But everyone knows yellow is reserved for morning. The maid gasps softly. She wouldn't dare. A silence, then, and the soft scrape of the comb again. You memorize it. You'll pass it along, indirectly, of course, to someone who needs to hear it. A warning, not a threat. Not yet. This is how you operate now. Quietly, tactically. A rumor here, a glance there. You start to understand the art of timing. A rumor that arrives too early dies before it can take root. But a rumor that arrives right after an inconvenient event, that's fuel to a fire that's already burning. And what happens when that fire gets hot enough? It makes someone very nervous. Today, that someone is Assistant Director Zhao of the Ministry of Rights. He's an arrogant man who once dismissed a eunuch's request as the squawk of a gelded rooster. That eunuch, your friend, subtly, quietly, is now gone. So you help something along. You mention to a senior court attendant within earshot of Zhao's valet that the official invitation to the autumn ceremony was oddly phrased this year. You say it casually while pouring tea. Curious how the wording made it seem like the emperor's health is faltering. Within hours, the rumor hits Zhao's ears. The emperor's been ill for weeks, and Zhao has been keeping it secret to maneuver a replacement heir. Of course, it's not true. Or maybe it is. That's the beauty of gossip. You don't have to know what's real. You just have to know what's useful. By evening, Zhao is flustered. He publicly requests an audience to clarify recent misunderstandings. The emperor raises an eyebrow, then waves him away. He doesn't like being asked to clarify things he hasn't heard yet. Zhao's status dims. Your usefulness? It brightens. Historians still debate whether eunuchs were primarily pawns or players, whether they were manipulated by the women of the court, or subtly shaping events behind their neutral facades. But in your slippers, you know the truth. The gossip that ruins a man rarely begins in the women's quarters. It begins with the eunuchs who carry their words. You've begun mapping influence in your head, not just who holds power, but who speaks to whom, and how often, and how long they wait before doing it. It's like a game of Go, but you're the only one playing in all directions. And then one day, you make a leap. You plant a story. Not a retelling, not a warning, a fabrication. You've noticed Lady Chow, respected, graceful, but ambitious, is gaining too many quiet allies. The Empress has looked at her twice now with that weary, dangerous expression. I see you, and I do not trust you. You speak to a perfumer's apprentice in the northern wing. Quiet boy, impressionable. You mention, while handing him a parcel, that you heard Lady Chiao has switched from ambergris to violet oil, which is strange. Everyone knows violet oil was the favorite of the last disgraced empress. You leave it there. 2 days later, Lady Chow is wearing violet oil. She's always worn it. She simply never stopped. But now it means something. You watch the ladies of the court shift away from her, like silk rippling away from a spill. She doesn't understand why. That's the beauty of it. You didn't push her. You simply tilted the floor. And yet, power is a mirror, one you can't gaze into too long. You've seen eunuchs who grew too bold, who leaned too far into influence. One, named Bai, even began hosting private meetings in the storehouse wing. Just tea and poetry, he said. He was seen drinking alone 3 nights later. Then, not seen again. You don't drink tea in the storehouse, but you do pass notes. You do arrange deliveries. You do leave doors open. Sometimes. People come to you now, whisper questions, test your reactions. What do you think the emperor meant when he said the river bends? Is it true the empress had a nosebleed during her morning prayers? Did Lady Shu's bird really bite a maid, or was it a message? You never answer directly. You become a mirror with just enough cloud to keep everyone guessing. At night, in your quarters, you sit in the dark and trace the patterns of the day. Who blinked? Who laughed too hard? Who left early? You're not just surviving anymore. You're shaping. Not with swords. Not with scrolls. With whispers. And your latest whisper is that the Empress has begun praying at dawn again, which wouldn't matter, except that she only does that when she's planning something big. You're already making sure others find out, not from you, of course, just in passing. It's easy to think of the palace as one large, glittering organism, a body with an emperor at its heart, courtiers as limbs, and concubines as its breath. But in truth, it's more like a battlefield shaped like a tea garden, and you, well, you're not just standing on the field anymore. You're playing spy versus spy. You never thought it would come to this. Eunuchs spying on eunuchs. But here you are, watching your fellow watchers, calculating their alliances, their habits, their tells. Take eunuch Min, for example. Smiles too easily. Carries messages between 2 departments that have no reason to talk. He always seems to have fresh ink on his hands, but never writes in public. Suspicious. Or Old Yun. Claims to be deaf in one ear. But the ear he claims works is always turned toward the noisiest courtyards. He knows things before even the Imperial recorders do. He never reacts when spoken to, but you've seen him shift, ever so slightly, when certain names are mentioned. You realize the Eunuch Corps has its own hierarchy, not the official one, the one with robes and ranks and duties. No, the real one is invisible. It's built on access, trust, and favors owed. Some eunuchs are gatekeepers to entire wings of the palace. Others are merely shadows, unnoticed, but always there. You've become one of the gatekeepers, and with that comes danger. One morning, a junior eunuch approaches you, eyes darting. He whispers, "They say master." He has been speaking to the southern prince's man. You say nothing, but your spine tightens. That's not just gossip, that's treason adjacent. Master, he is clever. Too clever. Maybe, he once told you, with a twinkle in his eye. The key to survival is knowing which lie is safe to tell. But now, he's missing. That evening, a handwritten notice is tacked up in the laundry hall. Master, he has been reassigned to the frontier silkworm post. You and every other eunuch knows what that means. Exile disguised as promotion. Historians still argue over whether such exiles were based on real crimes or manufactured whispers. Some say rival eunuchs invented scandals to thin the herd. Others believe factions loyal to different concubines turned eunuchs into weapons. You believe both, because you've seen it. You remember a eunuch, Chow, who had dirt on a consort's private visitor. Nothing scandalous, just a cousin from a rival clan. But Chow was clever. He hinted. He smiled. He almost used it. Then, he fell ill, collapsed in the garden with a pale face and a bowl of wine still steaming in his hand. You made sure you carried no such wine for the next few weeks. Instead, you watch and wait. Your own methods grow sharper. You keep tabs on the comings and goings of key eunuchs. Who dines together? Who avoids eye contact? Who always seems to walk near the emperor's carriage at just the right time? You build a mental map of allegiances. You note when someone gets new slippers before anyone else, or when a fresh robe arrives from the silk storeroom marked with an unusual pattern, plum blossoms out of season. Interesting. You begin to suspect someone is watching you. It starts with subtle things. A folded towel you didn't place. A shift in your sleeping mat, just slightly moved. Once, you find a single plum pit tucked inside your shoe. A message. You're not sure what, yet, but you know enough to sleep with your back to the wall that night. You speak less. Listen more. One of the palace clerks, a stooped man with ink-stained fingers and a twitch in his eye, catches your attention. He's everywhere, and nowhere. Not a eunuch, technically, but he works too closely with them, not to matter. You see him in the archives, in the kitchens, once even outside the harem's music hall, always writing, always listening. One day, he nods at you. You don't nod back. That afternoon, a note appears in your laundry tray. Unfolded, unsealed, unsigned. It reads, "The cicadas fall silent when winter is near. Consider where your roots lie." A warning? A threat? An offer? You burn the note. Then adjust your routine. Slightly. You start taking different corridors. You pause longer in thresholds. You let others see you pause. Sometimes, being watched is a shield. It makes your enemies wonder whether you know something, or are simply bait. You start countermeasures. You spread a rumor about yourself, nothing damaging, just odd. You let it be known that you once studied mathematics, that you can read faster than most. Within a week, you're asked to assist with ceremonial accounting records. A foot in a new door. From there, you begin tracking supply requests. Who's getting extra rice wine? Who's ordering excess candles? Who requested triple incense deliveries for the Lantern Festival? Patterns emerge. Lady Wu is stockpiling hair oil. Not strange, until you recall the oil was a gift from the Southern Prince's family. Now that's curious. You quietly pass this to a senior eunuch aligned with the Empress. Casually, like a dropped handkerchief, Lady Wu is summoned the next day for a health inspection. You hear later she fainted during questioning, not from fear, they say, but from poison in her powder. True? Doesn't matter. The palace has made up its mind. You never speak her name again. The battle between spies doesn't explode. It smolders. Long glances. Misplaced items. Misremembered orders. You begin to feel like you're swimming through silk and smoke. Every movement smooth, but with something sharp beneath. And yet, you thrive. Because you've made yourself useful to everyone, and beholden to no one. You are no longer a shadow. You're the mirror. And every secret now passes through your reflection. The Emperor, for all his glory, is still a man. You used to imagine him as a celestial being, unreachable and serene, eyes like polished jade and voice like thunder. But now, as you carry freshly steeped tea into his morning chamber, you see the truth. He is old, he is tired, and his slippers squeak just a little when he walks. You still don't speak to him, of course, not directly, but you observe him, and in a palace where power flows like tea from hand to hand, observation is influence. Today, he forgets the name of his astrologer. Yesterday, he asked for a concubine who's been dead for 6 months. You don't react. You simply bow deeper and withdraw faster. But you note it. The Son of Heaven is human, and that's the most dangerous thing of all. Even gods can make mistakes, and in a court full of knives dressed as fans, those mistakes have consequences. The eunuchs closest to the emperor have learned this. They do not correct him, but they redirect. If he forgets a name, they offer a different one. If he misremembers a decree, they interpret it favorably. They are part servants, part stage directors, part safety nets woven from silk and instinct. One day, during a routine scroll delivery, you overhear a conversation between the emperor and his brother. It begins softly, almost warmly, memories of childhood, fishing trips, an old tutor with bad breath. Then it turns. You speak too freely, the emperor murmurs. I speak only what others think, but fear to say. His brother replies. A pause, a long one. I should not have let you return from the border. Your breath stills in your throat. You shouldn't be here, but you're just out of view. Eyes lowered, hands trembling only slightly. You retreat. Later that day, the brother's horses are moved to a different stable, his staff reduced, his food taster replaced. He remains in the palace for another month. Then he returns to the border, this time voluntarily. Historians still debate whether the emperor feared his relatives more than his enemies. Some chronicles imply his brother plotted rebellion. Others say he was merely too popular. The truth, of course, lies buried under 1,000 layers of palace dust. But you were there, and you saw the look in the emperor's eyes. Not rage, not paranoia, loneliness, because power isolates. And no one is more isolated than the man everyone fears, but no one tells the truth. Except, sometimes, the eunuchs. You see it in small moments. When he falls asleep in the middle of calligraphy practice, and the lead eunuch gently guides his brush to complete the character. When he forgets that his favorite concubine is no longer summoned because she offended the empress, and a eunuch arranges for a new singer with a similar voice. You become part of this quiet caretaking. One day, you adjust the incense just before he enters his study, not because it's too strong, but because the last time he smelled that scent, he had a migraine. You remember, you always remember, and he notices, not directly, not verbally, but the next day, a new robe arrives for you, slightly finer fabric, a deeper gray, subtle, but unmistakable. You are now within arm's reach of divinity, and divinity, you learn, sweats in the summer, snores during naps, forgets names, craves mangoes. He is not a god. He is a man with too much silk and not enough honesty. And you are one of the few who can offer it. Carefully, of course, coded in deference, disguised as service. One afternoon, as the emperor walks through the hall of painted clouds, he stops before a scroll he's seen 100 times. A landscape, mountains, a river, very traditional. But today, he asks, why is there no boat? The eunuch beside him pauses. Perhaps, Your Majesty, he says gently, because the painter did not want the journey to end. The emperor nods. once, quietly, then continues walking. That eunuch is later promoted. Truth doesn't have to be raw, it just has to be shaped. You also begin to see how the emperor's whims become weapons. A concubine jokes that he favors dumplings over statecraft, and suddenly, dumplings disappear from the menu. A poem referencing a sagging moon is banned because someone says it describes His Majesty's brow, and yet he laughs when a parrot calls him sleepy dragon. He's not consistent, but he's not a fool. You're learning to predict his moods. The way he walks when he's pleased, shoulders loose, steps slow. The way his hand twitches when he's irritated. The way he taps his fingers when weighing something too heavy for words. There is power in that knowledge. A senior eunuch tells you. The emperor doesn't need truth. He needs comfort that feels like truth. So you begin offering it, subtly. You guide the timing of his visitors, delay those who will upset him, advance those who soothe. You adjust music, scent, warmth. The whole world bends to his moods, and you become one of the silent hands shaping that world. And yet, you never forget. He can still destroy you with a word. Even kindness is dangerous when wielded by someone so powerful. So you stay quiet, you stay careful, you stay near, because even a god, when lonely, might whisper something foolish into the wrong ear, and you are the ear. The higher a eunuch climbs, the more precarious his footing becomes. You've learned that. There was a time, not long ago, when you could drift through the silk corridors like wind, unseen, unbothered. But now, your shadow falls longer. Your name is spoken, albeit in whispers. And your presence makes people pause. That's when you know you've become something dangerous. You've risen. Yes, but rise too far. And the drop gets fatal. Look at Eunuch Liang. Liang was once the most trusted man in the entire palace. He stood behind the emperor during audiences. He selected the music for imperial feasts. Some say he even knew the names of every concubine's pet bird. Others say he decided which concubines would be seen at all. Then, one morning, Liang tripped while entering the emperor's hall. A simple thing, but the court laughed, and the emperor didn't. The next day, Liang's post was reassigned. 2 days later, his quarters were searched. 3 days after that, he was gone. No announcement, no exile decree, no scroll carved with shame, just gone. And now, no one says his name above a whisper. You understand this pattern now. You see it everywhere. Power, in the palace, isn't a mountain you climb. It's a pond of ice. You skate, thin, glistening, beautiful, and cracking under your weight. Every step forward is louder than the last. So you tread lightly. You decline certain favors now. A concubine offers you her personal seal to pass along a letter. No. A minister's assistant invites you to join him for wine in a private room. Absolutely not. You've learned to keep your favors small, your gestures quiet. A suggestion here, a shared glance there. Enough to be useful, never enough to be indispensable. Because indispensable things, they become threats. You watch a fellow eunuch fall into that trap. Eunuch Fei, elegant, educated, and far too witty for his own good. He begins giving private readings to the Empress Dowager. Nothing improper, just poetry. Interpretation, refined laughter in shaded corners. Then rumors start. That Fei knows what the emperor will say before he says it. That Fei has access to imperial letters. that Faye corrected a footnote on the ancestral rights document without permission. Small things, harmless, really. But by the end of the month, Faye is reassigned to inspect grain deliveries in a city so far south, it doesn't appear on most maps. Historians still argue whether high-ranking eunuchs overreached or were targeted out of envy. Some say their downfall was always inevitable, that the closer they came to the emperor's ear, the more others wanted them silenced. You know better. They didn't fall. They were pushed. And often by other eunuchs. The court may wear brocade, but underneath, it's all teeth. Sometimes, it's subtle, like requesting an audience slot that overlaps with someone else's, so they're seen arriving late, or suggesting that a certain robe color may resemble mourning garb, or simply misplacing an invitation to a feast. And sometimes, it's not subtle at all. You hear rumors that a eunuch was found with ink-stained hands, accused of forging an imperial seal. No trial, just vanishment. You start wearing gloves when handling documents, just in case. You also start planting misinformation. Nothing major, just breadcrumbs. You let it be known that you're prone to exaggeration, that you mishear things, that your memory is imperfect. You're crafting a version of yourself that's less dangerous, more forgettable. But behind that mask, your mind is a library of secrets. You're still close enough to the emperor to influence his mood. You change the incense in his chamber to sandalwood on stormy days. It calms him. You remove lotus blossom tea from his rotation. It reminds him of his late mother and makes him melancholy. And you never speak first in his presence. Always wait. Always let him lead. You once saw a eunuch try to correct the emperor's memory, just gently, about the name of a pavilion. The emperor stared at him and said, simply, "Then let it be renamed." It was, and the eunuch was never summoned again. You keep your tongue tucked like a scroll in a drawer. But not everyone has learned this. There's talk of a rising eunuch who has become favored by the emperor's newest concubine. He's young, beautiful, and ambitious. Too ambitious. You hear he's been accepting gifts from outside families, porcelain, poetry, rare orchids. You do not report him. You wait, because the palace takes care of its own warnings, like a fever burning out an infection. One morning, you hear the rustle of panic. That eunuch was found unconscious in the garden, collapsed over a shattered vase. The story is that he fainted from exhaustion. You see the way his fellow attendants won't meet your eye. You know better, The message is clear. Stay in your place, or you'll be placed somewhere else. But you also see something else that morning. Something smaller, more interesting. The emperor's chief calligrapher scratches a character wrong in his practice scroll. He frowns, sets it aside, and does not redo it. That character means faith, left flawed. Later, that scroll is hung in a pavilion anyway. That evening, the empress delays her prayers. A concubine cancels her bath. And you're asked to deliver a gift, a hairpin carved into the shape of a twisted phoenix. You don't ask what it means. You don't need to. You just carry it. Because in this palace, even rising too gracefully is a sin. There's a corridor near the Hall of Radiant Plum Blossoms where light always hits just right in the early morning, soft gold sliding over jade tiles. It's beautiful. Peaceful. It's also where a eunuch once died, not violently, not publicly, just quietly. A slip, a fall, A whisper that maybe he heard something he shouldn't have. No one speaks of it now, but every time you walk past that corridor, you remember, because you know that in the palace, the prettiest places hide the darkest secrets. And those secrets, they don't scream. They whisper. You hear one such whisper today. A concubine sighs in the bath, too loudly. If only I'd never accepted that bracelet, she murmurs, as her maid massages her shoulders. Which bracelet? The maid asks, innocent. The red jade one, the one with the hollow beads. Your hands freeze in midair, cloth halfway to a towel rack. That bracelet, you realize, is cursed, not with magic, but with association. It was once worn by a consort who was demoted for allegedly seducing the wrong official. The red jade is known, people notice it, and now it's back. Later that day, you see another concubine wearing it, not the one from the bath, a different one. You understand. The bracelet wasn't a regret. It was a warning. And now, someone's about to suffer for it. You say nothing, but you make sure a certain court poet receives a note that suggests red jade might be an excellent metaphor in his next composition. He does. 2 weeks later, the bracelet is never seen again, and neither is the woman who wore it last. In the palace, death doesn't always come by dagger or poison. Sometimes, it arrives through a whisper too loud, a glance too long, or a word spoken to the wrong person in the wrong courtyard. Death by whisper. You've seen it before. There was the maid who once boasted she'd seen the emperor without his headdress. She laughed, loudly. 3 days later, she choked on a plum seed at dinner. No one tried to save her. There was the cook who told a visiting noble that the empress didn't eat meat on certain days, not for health, but because she was superstitious. He vanished from the kitchens the same week. His replacement chopped vegetables so quietly, you wondered if he even breathed. Historians argue whether these deaths were accidents, coincidences, or court-sanctioned adjustments. There's no proof. Of course, there never is. But you know what silence smells like. You've folded its clothes. And lately, you've begun to smell it again. There's a growing tension in the palace, tight as drawn silk. It starts small. A broken teacup left unrepaired. A slip in ceremonial speech. A concubine whose gifts are returned unopened. Each, on its own, is nothing. But together, they add up to fear. You're summoned to the Empress's chambers. Not alone. There are others. Servants. A fortune teller. A scribe. She's seated behind a gold screen. You never see her face, only her shadow. She speaks slowly. There is a wind in the palace, she says. A cold one. Do you feel it? You answer with the only safe response. Yes, Your Majesty. Tell me, she says. What whispers have you heard? You choose carefully. You offer 2 pieces of gossip, one old, one inconsequential. She hums. You are dismissed, but as you leave, you feel it. 1,000 eyes behind that screen, measuring the exact weight of your words. You make it back to your quarters and sit, still, silent. You've just passed a test. You think. And that's when you realize the Empress isn't afraid of concubines. She's not afraid of officials. She's afraid of you. Not just you. Personally. Eunuchs. The watchers. The whisper carriers. The ones who know. And if she's afraid, she will strike. You begin to sleep in shorter cycles now. A habit you picked up from a retired eunuch named Hui, who once told you, "Those who sleep too soundly rarely wake where they fell asleep." You believe him. One night, you're shaken awake, not by a person, but by a sound. A soft knock on your wall. Once, twice, a signal. You wait. Another eunuch appears in the shadows of the courtyard. He whispers, "Lady Liu is gone. Not demoted. Gone." Lady Liu, the same concubine who once gave the emperor his favorite scarf, who once wrote a poem that moved the calligraphy master to tears. Gone? You ask nothing, but you light incense that night, not for prayer, for memory, because you know this palace forgets too easily, and you refuse to. Later that week, therefore, the emperor remarks that he hasn't seen Lady Liu in some time. A eunuch calmly replies, "She was moved to the pavilion of reflective waters, Your Majesty." The emperor nods. "Ah, of course. There is no pavilion of reflective waters," and no one corrects him. That's the kind of lie eunuchs are expected to tell. The soft lie. The lie that keeps harmony. The lie that tucks danger into silk and buries it under formality. You've told those lies before, and you'll tell them again, because in this world, where a whisper can kill, sometimes silence is the only kindness left. The women of the harem are not ornamental. Not really. You learned that long ago, but you've only just begun to understand the full extent of their influence. It's easy to think of them as caged birds, beautiful, plumed, passive, but they are hawks in brocade, queens without thrones, each one calculating, maneuvering, whispering, and sometimes striking, and sometimes you're the one they use to strike. You've become the message, the messenger, and the warning. It begins one humid morning in the Hall of Jade Wind. Lady Song, never the most important, but clever, asks you to deliver a comb to Lady May. Simple. The comb is carved ivory, polished smooth, but the teeth are deliberately chipped on one side. To an outsider, it means nothing, but you know better. In fan and comb language, yes, there's a whole symbolic world of hair tools. A broken tooth represents betrayal. A chipped edge? Dishonor. You deliver the comb anyway, setting it gently atop a stack of silk towels. You don't see Lady May's reaction, but you hear about it later. A shattered mirror, a bruised maid, a missed appointment with the Emperor. Lady Song smiles softly that evening, her voice syrupy as she thanks you for your efficiency. You do not return the smile. The harem is always speaking, even when it's silent. Sometimes it's with gifts, a box of pears sent just as another consort falls ill. Sometimes with absence, a refusal to attend a poetry reading, which in itself screams louder than any verse. You learn that tears can be strategic, that fainting in a corridor can delay an entire audience, that losing a hairpin at the wrong time can imply a tryst, a threat, or a plea. One morning, Lady Jo throws a tantrum over a misdelivered incense blend. "Lotus?" she shrieks. "Do I look like I belong in mourning?" You take the blame, because it was not a mistake. Lady Jo was seen walking with a eunuch rumored to be close to the Empress. The message was subtle, but clear. You're on thin ice. She knows it. You know it. But no one says it aloud. Historians often gloss over the strategies of concubines, reducing them to fashion and fertility. But you know they run empires, just sideways. Through mood makers, through you. You're sometimes asked to pass poetry. Not official, not signed, just little scrolls left in fans or under pillows. One spoke of a candle that burns at both ends. Days later, two concubines were caught arguing in the garden, their voices barely restrained. Another poem asked, "When do swallows forget how to fly?" The next morning, a concubine accused another of sorcery. No proof. Of course. There never is. But that woman was soon relocated to the quiet pavilion, a place where windows face inward, where the walls are very thick. You've seen the inside once. You try not to remember. And then there are the secret alliances. You notice them in the small things. A comb shared. A shawl returned too quickly. A gaze held half a second too long. Lady Wren and Lady Di start drinking the same tea. Unusual. They used to be rivals. Then you notice they begin walking together in the evenings. Then their maids begin whispering about Lady Ping's arrogance. A pattern. You don't interrupt it, but you do inform another eunuch, one close to the Empress. And soon, Lady Ping is invited to read religious texts in the monastery pavilion for 40 days. She returns thinner, quieter, but her enemies now wear gold-threaded robes. The harem strikes back, always. They use you when it suits them, and discard you just as quickly. You once helped Lady Wei hide a letter from her cousin, cleverly disguised as a prayer scroll. A week later, when the letter was discovered, she claimed you planted it. You were summoned, questioned, watched. She never even blinked. You survived only because the seal on the scroll had her crest. Amateur mistake. But you never forget the look she gave you afterward. Not gloating, not remorseful, just empty. That's when you understood. The concubines are not grateful. They are not allies. They are players. And you are a piece. You can be the dagger, or the sheath, but never the hand that wields. Still, there is a strange comfort in the role. You are important, necessary. You are fluent in a language no one admits exists. One evening, Lady Shu beckons you closer and says, in a tone too sweet to be real, "Tell Lady Anne that her new robes are stunning." You bow, but you know better. Stunning? A word with teeth, because Lady Anne's new robes are orange. Orange, in some contexts, implies fertility. In others, ambition. Lady Anne is currently childless. The next day, rumors swirl that she's been secretly seeing a physician, that she's trying to force a pregnancy. Is it true? No one knows. And now, no one cares. You were the spark, and the fire spreads without your help. You're careful now. You double-check what you carry. You inspect each scroll, even the ones you're not supposed to open. You sniff perfume before it's delivered. You taste tea if it's from an unfamiliar source. You trust no one, not even the concubine, who once wept in front of you, swearing she thought of you like a brother. You found that same woman weeks later, whispering your name into the Empress's ear. You bowed extra low when she passed you after that, because in the harem, you may survive a lie, but you won't survive a truth whispered at the wrong time. So you walk carefully, speak softly, carry daggers made of compliments, and never, ever forget. The most powerful woman in the palace is the one who smiles while she stabs. Paper walls have ears. You've known that since your first day in the palace, but now you're starting to realize the paper writes back. You begin noticing strange patterns in scrolls, in letters, in the fluttering notes passed between concubines during poetry recitals or incense ceremonies. At first glance, they're innocent. A flower drawn in the margin, a poem quoted halfway, but after a while, You learn to read between the brush strokes. One note left for the Empress contains a line from a well-known Tang Dynasty verse. The moon knows all that passes between lovers. That poem isn't about love, it's about betrayal. The original ends with, and still the knife waits beneath the moon. You say nothing as cow, coarse, but you tuck the memory away, because in the palace, paper trails are blood trails in disguise. You begin working briefly in the archives, helping rotate ceremonial documents, birth records, honorific decrees, sacrificial schedules, boring work, to most. But you start noticing things others miss. There's an edict listing the emperor's favorite foods, updated monthly. But the foods have changed drastically since last season. Once he favored duck and lychee. Now, suddenly, it's sea cucumber and winter melon. You remember sea cucumber as Lady Wren's family export. Winter melon? Lady Anne's favorite comfort food. And just like that, a boring list becomes a political barometer. You see this everywhere. An inventory request from the kitchens includes a surge in pine nuts. Lady Di is allergic to pine nuts. Coincidence? A receipt from the jeweler's shows a pair of golden hairpins engraved with mandarin ducks, traditional symbols of loyalty and love. The recipient? Not listed. But the delivery was made the morning after the Empress had a late-night visit from a calligrapher. You begin to wonder, is there anyone here not telling secrets on parchment? You start trailing paper like a shadow. Some eunuchs do it with whispers. You do it with documents. You notice which concubines receive which poems from court scholars. You recognize a phrase, wind on lake water, repeated 3 times in 3 different letters. Code. Surely. You're just not sure what for yet. Historians still argue about the prevalence of coded writing among the women of the palace. Some claim it was a courtly pastime. Others say it was a necessary survival tactic. But you know better, in a world where speech can damn you, and silence can be read as consent. Ink becomes armor. Even the Empress uses it. You've seen her diary. No, not the one kept in her chambers. That's for show. The real one is hidden in a lacquered case beneath her prayer bench. You saw it once during a cleaning rotation. Pages wrapped in oilcloth. The brushstrokes so fine they look like embroidery. You didn't read it. Not really. You remembered what you saw. That's different. A passage about dreams. Another about a tree that keeps blooming out of season. A single character written over and over again. Jing. Silence. You wonder who she's writing it for. Herself? The Emperor? The historians who'll never see it? Sometimes, the silence in this palace feels louder than words, but not all writing is subtle. One afternoon, you retrieve a fan poem left behind by Lady Ping, folded neatly, perfumed, forgotten, or meant to be found. It reads, "In moonlight, even shadows lie." That's not a poem. That's a challenge. You return the fan. Cleaned. Pressed. Message received. You begin to hear of eunuchs punished for reading things they shouldn't. One caught with a torn corner of a love letter in his sleeve. Another seen rifling through calligraphy scrolls. Both vanish within a week. You learn to read without touching. You glance over shoulders. You memorize brush patterns from a distance. You recognize calligraphy styles by scent and ink, color, alone. One day, a low-ranked concubine offers you a letter. "Please deliver this," she says, "to my cousin in the Ministry of Rights." You nod. Take it. Smile. Then burn it before lunch, because the Empress's cousin also works in the Ministry of Rights, and you are not a fool. Instead, you pass along a carefully revised version. She hopes your health remains strong, harmless, neutral, absolutely safe. You never hear of that concubine again, but you sleep well that night. Another day. You notice a scribe writing quickly, nervously, glancing behind him. He's copying court records, but when he's done, he pockets his own copy. You mention it to no one. You just start watching him more closely. A week later, his copy ends up torn. In the koi pond. You find a jarkey. Dried. Barely legible, but enough to see he's been tracking who sits closest to the emperor during feasts. Not his job. Not his place. You share that with the emperor's senior eunuch. Very casually. While pouring tea, 2 days later, the scribe is reassigned to the stables. You begin to feel like paper itself is alive here, folding, unfolding, reshaping reality with every hidden note and scribbled metaphor. You wonder how many wars have started with a poorly phrased line of poetry, or how many hearts have broken from a misplaced comma. You start using the margins yourself. Tiny markings. A dot here, a smudge there. They help you track which papers have moved, which have been read, which have been copied, because the most dangerous scroll is the one you don't know exists. You begin keeping a paper trail of your own, but not on paper, in your head, because here the ink dries fast, but blood dries faster, and a eunuch who keeps secrets too well, he becomes a threat, or worse, a myth. You've spent so long navigating the inner court, its silks and sighs, its whispers and winding corridors, that when you're suddenly assigned to accompany an envoy to the Ministry of Rights, the outer court feels like a different planet. Gone are the soft lanterns and perfumed courtyards. Here, everything smells like ink and dust and sweat. Scholar officials rush about in stiff robes, scrolls tucked under their arms like weapons. They speak in formal tones, walk with urgency, and carry the weight of bureaucracy like it's a badge of honor. And most of them, they look at you like you're beneath them. You're used to being invisible, but this is different. They see you, then choose not to, because you're a eunuch, a servant, a creature of the inner court, and the scholars pride themselves on being the true brain of the empire. One clerk even mutters under his breath as you pass, "What would a harem mouse know of policy?" You say nothing, but you notice the broken seal on the supply register he's carrying, and the misaligned column of ink, and the faint scent of jasmine on his sleeve, which means he's been meeting someone he shouldn't in the East Pavilion. You may not speak aloud, but your silence rings louder than his lecture ever will. Later, that same clerk is reassigned to border record duty. And now, the next time you walk through the ministry halls, no one forgets to bow. You begin to see the real power structure. The scholar officials pride themselves on their civil service exams, their endless poems, their grasp of Confucian ideals. But you've lived in a world where those ideals are conveniently set aside when someone wants a new robe or a rival removed. They hate the inner court. They say it's corrupt, that eunuchs are moral parasites, playing at politics without earning it. But the moment one of them wants a private audience with the emperor, or a favor from the empress, they go through you. They sneer at you in public. They bow to you in private. One minister, red-faced from wine and frustration, corners you in a side corridor. "Tell me," he hisses, Why the Emperor won't hear my proposal. You smile, bow, whisper. Perhaps your Excellency could change the color of your ceremonial belt? His Majesty dislikes shades too close to morning hues. He stares at you, then, slowly, nods. 3 days later, his proposal is approved. He never forgets your name. You begin to see the network, not just among eunuchs, among everyone who operates in the gray areas, the cooks who pass along love notes tucked into rice cakes, the laundry maids who accidentally mix up monograms, the garden boys who pretend not to overhear strategy meetings beside the koi pond. Everyone trades in whispers. And you're fluent. You make allies quietly. You help a junior scribe correct a ceremonial phrase before a major ritual. He never knows you were the one who leaked the mistake in the first place. You compliment a lady of the bedchamber's poetry at a gathering, just loud enough for the rival seated beside her to hear. That rival turns icy. Your complimented target beams. She passes your name to her steward. You get better wine in your quarter that evening. You start thinking like a spider, not catching prey, weaving connections. You also begin mapping the scholar-eunuch tension. It's an old rivalry. The outer court believes in rules. The inner court believes in relationships. And the eunuchs? You walk between both, without ever belonging to either. Historians still argue whether this divide weakened the empire or saved it. Some say the scholar officials were the last line of virtue. Others claim they were too rigid, too arrogant, blind to the realities of palace life. You know both sides are right, and both are wrong. You meet a particularly sharp scholar named Guo. He wears ink on his cuffs and sarcasm on his tongue. He hates the eunuch corps, makes no effort to hide it, but one day, he needs a favor. His cousin has been accused of impropriety. The evidence? A hair ornament found in her quarters, belonging to a high-ranking lady. It's damning, unless the ornament was planted. He asks you, stiffly, carefully, to find out. You visit the lady in question, say nothing of accusations, just mention, while folding linens, that the ornament's matching piece was found in the laundry bin 2 days ago. Odd, isn't it? That night, the lady quietly drops the charges. Guo never thanks you aloud, but later, he invites you to a private reading of his latest essay. The topic? The invisible engines of imperial harmony. You chuckle. He pretends not to notice. There's a joke among eunuchs. If the ministers ran the palace alone, we'd all starve from paperwork. You're beginning to believe it because while they memorize laws, you memorize habits. While they quote the sages, you quote people's favorite teacups, their childhood traumas, their pet allergies. One afternoon, you witness a shouting match between two officials over land rights. Their words are fire and thunder. But what you notice, one grips his sleeve when he lies. The other uses the same metaphor 3 times when nervous. You don't intervene. But later, you share these observations with a high-ranking concubine whose family happens to own land in the disputed region. 2 weeks later, the emperor announces a new decree favoring her family's interests. Coincidence? You know better. You're not just a bridge between inner and outer court now. You're a ferry, carrying people messages, motives, and sometimes corpses, because when the scholar officials strike, it's with scrolls. But when eunuchs retaliate, it's quieter, a shift in daily schedule, a changed physician's rotation, an accidental delay in delivering medicine, and always, a new eunuch standing in a space once occupied by someone else. You remember them all, because while everyone else is writing history, you're memorizing it, one whisper at a time. There's a saying among eunuchs: if a whisper survives long enough, it becomes a memory. If it grows louder, it becomes history. And in your world, nothing is ever truly forgotten, not by you. Word travels fast in the palace, but memories travel farther, across reigns, across generations. What a concubine once muttered behind a fan during a spring banquet can find its way, twisted, embellished, dangerous, into the hands of someone 3 emperors later. This is the network. You first glimpse it when an elderly eunuch visits the palace, bent-backed, soft-spoken, his face like worn parchment. He retired 2 reigns ago. Most assumed he'd died. But now he's here, sitting in the shade of a pagoda, drinking ginseng tea like he never left. No one says why. You watch as younger eunuchs file past him, discreetly. Some offer greetings, some just stand near him in silence. He speaks to almost no one, until he turns to you. Your left eye twitches when you're hiding something, he says. You blink. He smiles. It's endearing, but dangerous. He sips his tea. Do you write things down? You shake your head. Good. A pause. Do you share what you remember? Only when needed. He nods. That's why you're still alive. He says nothing more. And you realize the most powerful network in the palace isn't written. It isn't even spoken aloud. It's remembered, a web of lived experience passed silently from one eunuch to the next. This man knows things no archive ever recorded. Who really poisoned the Empress Dowager's cat? What was hidden in the music scroll sent to the Western Province governor? Why an entire family line was erased from temple records? He's not a relic. He's a repository. And now, you are too. Because information doesn't belong to people in the palace. It moves between them, hops fences, floats between folds of robes, hides inside ceremonial fans. You become part of this current You begin to receive visitors. Not official, not direct. Just servants from other quarters who linger a bit too long when delivering folded linens. A maid who asks a strange question. Is Lady Shu still afraid of thunder? You reply, only if the thunder comes during mealtime. She nods, leaves. 2 days later, Lady Shu is seen in the Emperor's quarters during a storm. Coincidence? You doubt it. Eunuchs now come to you from other palaces, other cities. When foreign dignitaries visit, you're the one chosen to serve the breakfast trays. Not for your tea skills, but because you understand how to watch. You notice that the ambassador's attendant flinches when anyone mentions silver coinage. That the second wife of a southern prince speaks Mandarin too fluently for someone raised in the mountains. You say nothing, but you file it away. The network stretches further than the palace. It seeps into temples, into summer estates, into the homes of retired courtiers who still pull strings from embroidered armchairs. You realize that eunuchs, for all their closeness to power, are not just courtiers. You are keepers of patterns, of shame, of family trees edited in candlelight. You once overhear a noblewoman remark that her family descends from the same bloodline as the founding emperor. You know that's not true. You know because you once helped carry a box of burnt genealogy scrolls to the fire pit, because the founding emperor had no surviving daughters, and because the man who forged those scrolls was buried in the North Orchard without a namestone. You could correct her. You don't. You let her believe her fantasy. Because sometimes lies keep the peace, and you keep the lies alive, but only the safe ones. Occasionally, someone asks you directly, "Did that really happen? Was he really exiled for sleeping with the Empress's maid? Was the Emperor's third child actually his?" You smile. You shrug. You say, "Who's to say?" And that's enough. The network protects itself. You never expose too much, never ask for gratitude, just share enough. And so, when you're poisoned by a tainted apricot kernel, yes, it happens. No, you don't die. You already know which 3 people to suspect. One disappears. One retires suddenly. And the third? The third brings you wine and apologizes before you've even recovered. You drink it, because you're no longer afraid. You know too much, and everyone knows that you know too much. That's your armor now. Some eunuchs rise by flattery, others by treachery. You've risen by memory, and memory, you've learned, is sharper than any sword in the palace. Sharper and quieter, because someday, when this emperor is gone, and the names have changed, and the scrolls have been rewritten again, someone will need to know who stood where during the final feast, who whispered what beneath the peony arch, who smiled when the music stopped, and you'll be there, still remembering, because somebody has to. You're summoned to the Hall of Supreme Clarity, again, not to serve tea, not to adjust lanterns, but to stand quietly by the window while the Grand Council debates whether or not to impose a new tax on salt merchants in the southern provinces. You are not addressed. You are not acknowledged. But you are very much included, because they know you'll carry the mood of the meeting back to the inner court, not as gossip, not as treason, but as atmospheric pressure. The inner court feels the outer court's tremors through you, and sometimes you cause the tremors yourself. You've reached that rare place now, influence without office, power without title. You're not the loudest voice. You're the quiet breath between decisions, the pause before the emperor signs his name. And like all eunuchs who reach this level, you start to notice a change, not in the palace, but in yourself. You no longer flinch when someone raises their voice. You no longer bow too deeply. You even begin to forget your own given name, because it's been years since anyone used it. You are not a person in the way others are. You are a position, and like any position, you can be moved. You can be erased. One evening, the Empress herself sends for you. You're led into her private quarters, past the outer garden where not even ministers are allowed. A white crane picks at lotus roots in the moonlight. Wind stirs the curtains. Everything smells of plum and old paper. She's seated at her desk, writing. She doesn't look up. "I'm told you know what the Chancellor eats when he lies," she says. You bow, not too deeply. "Dried persimmons, Your Majesty." She nods. "Once." "Then I trust you can tell me who's lying now." You don't ask what she means. You simply begin. Because you've been watching. The second consort's recent visit to the Imperial Seal archives. The mysterious temple donations in the Grand Counselor's name. The Empress's own maid, seen speaking with a palace cook who doesn't belong to her kitchens. These aren't accusations. They're possibilities. She listens. She does not interrupt. When you finish, she says, "You're not afraid I'll have you killed for knowing all this?" "No, Your Majesty." You reply softly. "Why not?" "Because I've only told you what you already suspected." She smiles. And you are dismissed. You return to your quarters with no reward. No acknowledgement, just the same slippers, the same robes. But the next day, your meals are slightly warmer. Your bed, turned down earlier. It's enough. Because influence is not about recognition. It's about access. You walk through the palace, now with the air of someone who cannot be stopped, only redirected. You are consulted on scheduling, on menus, on music, not because these things matter in themselves, but because they influence how the emperor feels, and how he feels dictates everything. And yet, for all your poise, all your calm, you feel the ground shifting. The emperor is aging. His handwriting trembles now. His naps are longer. His questions, sometimes repeated, succession talk brews beneath every silk canopy. Which son? Which faction? Which consort holds the cards? The palace pretends not to discuss it, but you know better. You begin to see certain eunuchs move differently, seeking out alliances, avoiding controversial topics, spending more time in the treasury. You begin to receive gifts, quiet ones, a better brush, a robe with finer stitching, an invitation to a poetry recital that was not meant for your rank. You decline them all. You are not choosing sides, because when the dragon dies, his shadow crushes everyone who stood too close. Still, you watch. The third prince smiles too much. The fifth prince avoids the emperor's gaze. The empress starts attending ancestral rites more frequently. The concubines stop speaking during morning prayers. The emperor's calligraphy master begins each lesson with the phrase, "Loyalty survives uncertainty." The air is heavy, and yet, there's a certain peace in your role. You are not the one writing edicts. You are the one watching the brush. You've begun mentoring a younger eunuch. He reminds you of yourself, quiet, observant, not too eager. You teach him how to read glances, how to fold towels, how to mishear conversations when appropriate. You tell him, the trick isn't knowing more than anyone else. It's knowing what not to say, and when not to say it. He nods. He learns. And someday, he will carry your secrets too. The network survives through succession, not of emperors, but of eunuchs. One morning, a minister's aide is caught sneaking a private note out of the palace. The note mentions your name, briefly, as a trusted listener. The aide is punished. You are not. But you notice your doors are watched more closely after that. You leave them open. Let them listen. Because at this point, they only hear what you want them to. There's something freeing about that. You are not a prisoner of this place anymore. You are its memory, its mirror, its pulse. And when the emperor does die, and he will soon, you will still be standing. Not because you are lucky, but because you never stood too close. The wind changes before the banners do. It's one of those old palace sayings, useless to most, prophetic to those who've survived long enough to understand it. And today, as you walk through the outer corridor of the Hall of Tranquil Authority, you feel the change, in the air, in the pace of footsteps, in the sudden politeness of junior officials who usually ignore you. The emperor is dying. No one says it out loud. No one dares. But the signs are unmistakable. His appetite has dwindled. His temper has shortened. He no longer requests the zither in the evenings, or the plum wine before bed. His favorite dog hasn't been seen in a week. And most telling of all, he's stopped writing. For a man whose calligraphy once filled entire galleries, who once revised edicts until dawn, this silence is louder than morning bells. You are summoned. not to his bedside. You're not that foolish. You are sent to manage the corridors. Who passes? Who doesn't? A quiet directive. Limit proximity. You choose who sees him in his final days, and you remember who asked to visit and who didn't. It matters, because as the dragon throne flickers, everyone prepares to burn incense or pitch fire. The empress begins dressing in darker silks. For the season, she says. The concubines walk with heads bowed lower than usual. The princes, oh, the princes, begin to drift into your world. Not the harem, not the court. The shadows between them. They start asking questions. The emperor mentioned my garden last week. Do you think he meant something? Has the empress sent for the ancestral tablets yet? Did my brother speak with the physicians before or after the chest pain? You do not answer, oh. But you take note. There is no open fighting. Not yet. Just positioning. The third prince offers gifts to your staff. New shoes, better soap, silk bookmarks. The fifth prince stops by the tea pavilion and casually mentions a eunuch from his childhood who reminds him of you. You smile, politely. You recommend that bookmarks be refused. You advise the tea pavilion staff to forget the visit, because taking sides now is a mistake. The scholars, meanwhile, are sharpening their petitions. The chancellor delivers scrolls twice a day now, each longer than the last. You skim them in transit. Most are performative, calls for stability, references to virtue, comparisons to past emperors. But one scroll does not reach the emperor at all. You redirect it, softly, without fanfare, because that scroll names the third prince as successor. Too early, too boldly. You don't burn it. You file it away. In your head. Historians often speak of sudden coups and decisive proclamations. But you've learned the truth. Power doesn't transfer with a bang. It seeps. And when it moves, it leaves behind a vacuum so vast it pulls in everything. You receive instructions to begin morning preparations. Quiet ones. White paper for the temple halls. Plain robes in reserve. You oversee it all without blinking, but you also visit the musicians, suggest a new tune, something gentler. You walk through the kitchens, noting who still eats meat, who has begun fasting. You visit the calligraphy room and place a fresh brush at the emperor's desk. He never uses it. Then, one night, it happens. No bell tolls, no decree is read, but you feel it, a stillness, deeper than sleep. He has passed. The palace does not erupt. It recoils. The empress disappears behind her veil. The princes vanish into prayer chambers. The inner court weeps into silk sleeves. And you walk. From hall to hall, you check the incense, the curtains, the seating charts for the morning rites. You reposition a flower arrangement near the ancestral altar so the third prince doesn't stand too near the central brazier. Subtle, but meaningful. You guide the palace through death, as if through a fog you've mapped 1,000 times before. And quietly, you prepare for the battle to begin, because while the emperor lies still, his shadow still stirs. You notice visitors at odd hours, messengers traveling without insignia, notes burned before being read, and eunuchs whispering again, this time about you, not in fear, not in suspicion, in curiosity. Will he serve the next emperor? Will he retire? Will he choose? The idea shocks you. You've always been the listener, the observer, but now In this moment of transition, people believe you have a say, and perhaps you do. You don't issue proclamations, but you choose which cup to place on the new emperor's table. You choose which concubine is invited to the morning rites. You choose whether to nod when the chancellor requests an audience. And your nod, your silence, means everything. You watch as the third prince steps forward, poised, prepared, not because he's the strongest, because he's the most acceptable to the most people. And because you did not stop him, he bows to the empress, then to the altar, then to you, not deeply, but just enough. The palace exhales, the dynasty lives on. You, too, have survived another reign. And now the gossip begins again. Same palace, new ruler, different shadows. You adjust your robe, step into the corridor, and smile, because once again, you're not just in the room where it happens, you're the one who remembers how it happened. And just like that, there is a new sun in the sky, a new emperor ascends the dragon throne, and the palace exhales, not with joy, not with grief, but with that strange hush of people trying very hard to pretend nothing changed when everything did. You watch the coronation from behind a carved screen. You're not supposed to be there, not really, but you're always there. You've attended more royal rituals than most ministers. You know the order of bows, the names of the ancestral tablets, the way the incense must curl exactly once before the new sovereign speaks. The young emperor's voice is steady, well-trained, a little too crisp, the kind of voice that hasn't yet learned to bend under the weight of real power. He wears the robes beautifully, though that helps. You note who cheers loudest, who hesitates, who glances sideways instead of down. You remember everything. You're older now. Your hands tremble a little when pouring tea. You pretend it's from cold weather. No one comments. But people speak differently when you're in the room. More carefully. With more deference. Some even lower their heads as you pass. The same people who once laughed behind your back now bow with just a little too much sincerity. Because you've become something new. A fixture. An institution. The last remaining thread that connects the old reign to the new. You never raised your voice. Never held a title. Yet you hold memory. And in the palace. That may be the most terrifying power of all. Even the new emperor seeks your counsel. Informally. Of course. Late at night. When the halls are quiet and the oil lamps burn low. He asks you what his father was really like. You hesitate. Then say. He liked plum blossoms. And feared being alone. The emperor nods. Says nothing. But the next day, he orders plum blossoms planted beside the ancestral hall. That's your answer. The eunuchs around you are younger now, fresher-faced, ambitious. They remind you of your first years, curious, cautious, clumsy with their secrets. You begin training them. You teach them how to listen when no one is speaking, how to remember without writing, how to smile without promising, how to deliver truth wrapped in silence. They ask why. And you say, because if you don't, someone else will write your version of history for you. They don't understand. Yet. But they will. And the gossip? Oh, it never stops. Even now. A concubine rumored to carry the emperor's first child. A courtier who suddenly retires to the mountains after offending the empress. A jade pendant found in the wrong bedchamber. The game continues. Always. You watch it from your place in the shadows. Not as a player now, but as the memory of players past. One day, a scribe asks if you'll contribute to the new chronicles. A reflection, he calls it. From someone who knew the late emperor well. You smile and decline. Because the moment you write something down, it stops being yours. And besides, if anyone truly wishes to know, they'll ask. And if they don't, then perhaps it's better they never do. You continue walking the same corridors, slower now, but with purpose. You pass the same screen where you once stood as a child, holding a silk towel, trembling with fear. Now, younger eunuchs tremble before you. You nod at them gently, because everyone deserves a chance to learn the language of silence. You light incense each morning, not to pray, but to remember names, events, lessons, mistakes. You speak them aloud only to yourself, voice barely above a whisper, not because you're forgetful, but because you know what forgetting can cost. You have no tomb waiting for you, no lineage, no monument, but your legacy walks past you every day, on slippered feet, with lowered eyes, speaking softly encoded phrases they don't even know you invented. And when your time comes, you'll vanish like the others. No ceremony, no mourning, just an empty robe, a folded mat, and silence. But until then, you remain, because someone must remember who was favored and why, who fell and when, who spoke too soon and who never spoke at all. Someone must hold the final whispers, and you always have. And now, as the corridors of the palace grow still and the last lantern flickers out, you return to your quiet chamber. The silk walls seem softer somehow. The air smells of sandalwood and old paper. Your robe slips from your shoulders, folded with practiced care. You sit beside the low table, hands resting in your lap, breath steady. Outside, a wind stirs the bamboo. Nothing urgent, just the gentle reminder that time moves, even here, even now. You think of everything you've seen, everything you've carried, the secrets you protected, the lies you allowed to bloom, the truths you buried beneath ceremony and protocol, and still, you survived. You did more than survive. You listened. You remembered. You endured. Not every voice in history shouts. Some whisper. And it is those whispers that live longest. Your eyes close, not from fatigue, but from peace. You've done what was required, more than what was asked, less than what was deserved, but exactly what was needed. The palace no longer fears you. It respects you, and maybe in its own silent way, it thanks you. So rest now, watcher of dynasties. The scrolls are safe, the whispers are preserved, the night is long, but your story, it lingers like incense in the morning air. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.